If you were a kid who grew up in the early 2000s and a fan of both cartoons and video games, then you know some of the coolest games on the planet were the Nicktoons Crossover Games. Whether they be on a console or on a computer, just having a game where our beloved Nicktoons characters could battle side by side or even battle against each other was just a pretty magical feeling. But have you ever wondered just who the heck is even playable in all these games? Or maybe you're just a die-hard Jimmy or Timmy, Otis, or Jenny fan who just wants to be able to play as your favorite character in any game you can. Or maybe you're like me and you just want to see who comes out on top over who in sheer playable popularity. Then this video has you covered. Strap in as we count up every single playable Nicktoons crossover character in a video that'll span across the entirety of Nickelodeon's rich cartoon and video game history. Unless you're like a fan of Chalk Zone, then I'm just gonna tell you right now, somehow not a single Chalk Zone character is playable in anything ever. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it's just like that. Though, before we can get into all that, first let's start with a bit of a history lesson, as the Nicktoons crossover games have a pretty interesting backstory that I feel not too many people know the full story of. Now, the history of the Nicktoons crossover games can actually be split up into some pretty distinct eras. Starting off with what I like to call the Nicktoons Bronze Age, only really consisting of like a handful of weird games that they're trying to play around with before the series really got its identity, and is notable for actually featuring some of Nick's 90s properties. Then, after going through some growing pains, that directly led us into the release of Nicktoons Unite, as well as what I like to call the Nicktoons Golden Era. Of course, featuring the games people most associate and acclaim when it comes to the Nicktoons crossover series, all mostly platforming titles featuring the Big Four: Jimmy, Timmy, Danny, and the Bob. Playable in some of the most above-average licensed 3D platformers you could find at the time, and it was peak. Though, unfortunately, like all good things, it eventually had to come to an end, with the series ending after the release of Globs of Doom. But while the bigger budget titles would go dormant for a bit, Nick were targeting a somewhat new area of games in the background, as they started to really experiment with Flash games. Now, not all of them around this time were anything too special, but there were some pretty big hits, notably Nick's Super Brawl series, a series of crossover Flash traditional fighters that were honestly way higher effort than they had any real right to be. But then sometime in 2015 and onward, Nick would get really serious about their Flash games, in what I like to call the Flash spam era, just absolutely churning out any type of crossover game they could think of. While they still would make the occasional Super Brawl, it was clear their new focus was on the Star series, which was basically just a Flash game series built around slapping their fan favorite Nicktoons and live action stars into any sort of sporting event they could find. These games definitely felt a little bit cheaper than the Flash games of before, but they're still decent enough in a mindless Flash game kind of way. But then of course came the death of Flash as we know it. And although they would make the jump to HTML5, I guess eventually either the popularity of these types of games just kind of fell off, or they just didn't see the profit in it anymore, because sometime in 2020, they decided to go right back to making console games. In our current era, and what I like to call the retro revival era, as it's not only bringing back the kart racers that started this whole franchise, but are games that give the top billing to some of their previously dormant 90s characters, most of which haven't been seen or playable since the Nick crossover's very very beginning. Okay, so now you have a rough rundown on the history, but in order to start this list, we've got to get into some ground rules. Just what makes a game a Nicktoons crossover game in the first place? Well, first things first, in order to be a true Nicktoons style crossover, it has to be decently sized. We're not looking for just any old A show meets B show type of thing. We're looking for something a little bit bigger in scope. You know, like the Nicktoons Unite games. Though, although those games set the standard at least a 4-way crossover, I'm willing to bring it down to a 3-way. Though, on the topic of characters, I feel I should clarify that they have to be actually playable characters. Meaning no characters who only serve the roles of assists, and no characters baked into the appearance or baked into the moveset of another character will be counted. Unless they are given credit on the character select screen. Now, I know that might seem a little weird at first, but think about it. If I was doing, say, a Guilty Gear appearances video, I'd for sure count May as a playable character, but I wouldn't go as far as to count, like, Mr. Dolphin as a character you play as. It's just part of her moveset. Same with, like, King Julian in the Super Brawl games. I'm not gonna count Mort. Though, the second you bring their name to the character select screen, things get a little more official, like, say, Rosalina and Luma from Smash Brothers. If it was just Rosalina, I wouldn't even bat him an eye, but since they bring him up, it starts to look a little more official, you know? On to our next rule. I should probably also mention that we're only really looking at the shows hosted on Nick and Nicktoons and stuff like that. So no, I will not be including the Nick Jr. crossover games, as those are just kinda their own thing. Also, to avoid any unnecessary bloating of this list, ports, remakes, and demakes will only be counted if they happen to feature any roster differences from their other versions, meaning we will be looking at and counting the home port as well as the 2 handheld versions of Battle for Volcano Island, as they all feature different playable rosters, but we will only be counting the home version of Nicktoons Unite, since all of its other versions host the same exact playable characters, despite technically being different games. And on the topic of crossovers, first off, in order for a crossover to be counted, it has to contain at least a 50-50 split between the Nicktoons and whatever thing they're crossing over with, and on top of that, we will only be counting the playable Nicktoons and not whatever thing they're crossing over with. This rule is literally only in place so I don't have to count up to the 50 separate playable real-life baseball players of Nicktoons MLB and MLB 3D. Oh, and also no card games, obviously. Also, while certain character alt costumes may resemble certain other characters found in these games, those will obviously not be counted towards the character's official playable appearances tally. And for things like minigame collections, you'll regularly find there are 2 types. The Mario Party types, which feature a whole board game to play around and have the characters battling each other in the same minigames to compete for points or coins or whatever. And then you have the more WarioWare styled minigame collections, where each franchise is split up into their own separate minigames with very little overlap, and usually force you to play as a specific character or even no character at all, just for like a high score or something. As you can imagine, we will only be counting games that fit the former rather than the latter. Though here, we might as well get into the weird exceptions or games of note that I feel I need to bring up, because somehow one of these minigame collections manages to survive as both? With that game being Nick Slime Cup, a minigame collection where you pick a specific team of characters, which contain a character who are only playable in about 1 minigame each, but you compete against other characters from other teams, so it's more like 5 mini flash games with character selects rolled into one. I was just so baffled by it, I decided to just lump the whole thing together. It's weird. And then there was a game that was fitting the bill a little too much. Nick released this batch of like 3 winter games that have you playing as SpongeBob, Michelangelo, and Sanjay in like a couple of mini games. That's right, not SpongeBob or Mikey, and as in you play as all of them at once. I don't know, this feels like cheating, you know? I wouldn't count this personally. And then we have Nick Scary Brawl. If you think I'm counting the same list of characters twice just because they went ahead and made a whole other version of the roster that's the exact goddamn same except they're translucent green, then you are insane. Then there's this Nick theme park VR experience called Slime Zone, where they say you can play as different Nickelodeon characters, but in reality, you're just kind of virtually wearing the disembodied head and hands of the respective characters. So personally, I wouldn't count that either. Then, however, we get to our final oddity, that at this point, I'm still a little unsure if I should have counted or not. Nickverse is a now unlisted, officially licensed Roblox experience that had players going around and completing quests in various Nick-themed worlds. The game also had a feature where you could spend some Robux in-game to take on the form of various Nicktoons characters, which in my brain I immediately counted as, oh, that's a costume. In Roblox, you can dress your avatar in various looks based off fictional characters, albeit mostly unofficially. So why should I count this as a real playable appearance when all it is just a costume change? But then I saw most people referred to them as morphs rather than costumes, and I was starting to think, is that different enough from just a regular costume to be counted as playing as them? But then there's also the fact that this is the only game that's just completely gone, and there's very little official information on it I can gather on who was even definitively in that shop. I mean, there is a page on the Nickelodeon Wiki, but honestly, I trust that website about as far as I can throw it. So, with all that being said, I just chose not to include it. But hey, just like with all the games I've mentioned before, if you, the viewer at home, think a game that I put off to the side should be counted, then you can go right ahead and count them yourself. And hey, I'll take the time right now just to shout out that game's really funny one-timers, being the cabbage salesman from Avatar, Big Nate, and Snow Sponge. Though, with all that big talk out of the way, it's probably become pretty obvious that having to deal with so many defunct and obscure games for this vid, this list is maybe just a little bit more scuffed than usual. Like, 90% of these games just don't have dedicated pages of information out there for them. And the only reason I even found half of these games is I just typed in Nickelodeon on the Flashpoint search bar and just scrolled down the entire list, picking out any sort of crossover game I could find. So if there's a long-lost Flash title that you remember from your childhood that isn't on this list, then A, it might have just been fan-made, or B, it might be genuinely lost to time. So, with that being said, we get to my final rule, which is, think of this more as a highly accurate overview rather than a 100% accurate list. Not only because some people might want to include some games that I didn't, but also because I am just one guy putting this all together. Sometimes mistakes slip through the cracks. But even with all these rules in place, we still have a whopping 250 plus characters to talk about across more than 80 total playable titles. I hope you're excited. And hey, if you like this video, be sure to, I don't know, like, maybe even subscribe if you're feeling crazy. But hey, enough shilling, let's get on with the video. And as always, starting at the one-timers, the characters who have only ever made a playable appearance in one game. And here, we're actually starting at the very beginning of the entire series, Nicktoons Racing. And here, we have two characters who debuted at the crossover series' very inception, but wound up featuring in literally nothing else. You have Darwin Thornberry from the Wild Thornberries, and Ickis from Ah Real Monsters. But hey, let's not forget, this isn't just a children's racing game. This was a 5th console generation children's racing game. And what's one of those without a smarmy, condescending, evil rival villain to cheat during the race and taunt you when you lose? Seriously, these games had a lot of these. And Nicktoons Racing is no different, because it's where we have the Mystery Racer. Ooh, who could he be? Yeah, it's kind of just Plankton, which maybe means I should lump this under Plankton's playable appearances, but he puts on a whole persona and everything. I think it's special enough. I'll count this as a separate thing. Following that, we have Nicktoons Basketball, where we have the only appearances of Timmy Turner's school friend AJ and Goddard, Jimmy Neutron's mechanical canine. Then in the plug-and-play game, Nicktoons Summer Camp, we have the only playable appearance of Waffle from Cat Scratch. Following that, in Nicktoons Winners' Cup Racing, we have two pretty big villains, Professor Finbar Calamitous from Jimmy Neutron, and Danny Phantom's Vlad Plasmius. Really sad to see this guy specifically never got an appearance in any of the fighting games. He's really cool. Then we have Nicktoons Attack of the Toy Bots, with some characters only accessible via secret code. The playable enemies of Mr. Huggles and Exo Huggles 9000. Which, I mean, might not sound too exciting, but hey, you better watch your tone, or this guy might just straight up murder your parents. Then we actually move on to the DS version of Attack of the Toy Bots, with some pretty strange characters. Evil Danny and SpongeGar, who are for some reason given the names Danny Phantom 2 and SpongeBob 2. Now, these aren't just skins like the ones featured in the console release of Attack of the Toy Bots, but are actually distinctly separate playable characters. So my theory is they wanted each character to have costumes like the console release, quickly realized how much harder it was to hand animate costumes through pixel art rather than just slightly tweaking a 3D model, either gave up or ran out of time making them, and just made whatever they had done into fun little bonus characters. Oh, and Mr. Blick, also from Cat Scratch, is playable here as well. Oh boy, back to more racing game villains, with Lord Nitro from Nicktoons Nitro. Yes, this is the best picture I could find of him, shut up. Who kidnaps our beloved Nicktoons from their home worlds to face off in his interstellar racing tournament. Literally just a name brand Emperor Velo, and that guy wasn't even really that cool to begin with. And following that, even more game original characters, though here I'm unsure if these should even count. We have the Vessel of Portentia and SpongeGlob, two characters you play as during the penultimate and final boss of the console versions of Globs of Doom. You see, the Vessel of Portentia is this big MacGuffin the heroes, and Zim, and villains, and Dib, have to find the batteries for to defeat the main villain, Globulus and his Globs of Doom, which you play as / control in this final boss. But then, immediately after, the villains, and Dib, betray the heroes, and Zim, to capture and control Globulus for their future evil schemes. But then, it's revealed that Globulus isn't actually that bad of a guy. He was just pissed because he's just a booger that was created at the beginning of time when God sneezed, and boogers don't amount to shit in this world, I guess. But then SpongeBob gives him a rousing speech about body positivity, and they feed him a shit ton of Krabby Patties, which not only gives him the inspiration to take on the form of SpongeBob to become SpongeGlob, but gives him the power to really easily kick the shit out of the villains and Dib, and to save the day once and for all. Anyway, yeah, you just play as these two things in the two boss fights in the end. I don't know if these are really characters, but I feel like someone would yell at me for not including them, so here you go, man. Just get off my back. Then back to some more official characters in Nick Racer's Revolution 3D. The most scuffed, bootleg-feeling kart racer I've ever had the misfortune of playing, just for getting the footage you're seeing right now. We have Momo, the flying lemur from Avatar, Kowalski from the Penguins of Madagascar, Bucket and Skinner from Bucket and Skinner. Never heard of it. Apparently it got canceled mid-first season, so you know it just must have been a smash hit, real underrated gem. And then on the polar opposite of Nick sitcom success, you have Spencer from iCarly. Just take a look at some of these models too, by the way. Just, ugh. Then up next, we have a real FGC classic, Nick Super Brawl 2, baby. With its exclusive characters, Kyle the Wizard from Fanboy and Chum Chum, a generic player monkey from Monkey Quest, and classic SpongeBob. And no, I'm not talking about classic SpongeBob like on some YouTube video essay, SpongeBob Golden Era shit, or those weird drawings of him killing his new season counterpart on some Ivan the Terrible, Saturn devouring his son biblical shit. No, I'm talking classic SpongeBob, as in the SpongeBob from the original Super Brawl. No, you see, the SpongeBob in previous Super Brawls was interesting. The Krusty Krab that day must have been serving up a menu of nothing but stale bread, iceless water, and dirt, because in these games, SpongeBob, as you can probably just tell from the outfit, is pretty much a straight-up Ryu clone. But when Super Brawl 2 rolled around, they decided they wanted a SpongeBob that actually resembled SpongeBob in moveset, so they made a whole new one for him while keeping the older one as a fun bonus character for those who preferred the original, now under the name Classic SpongeBob. You know, this is completely off topic, but I'm just now realizing when people see this image today, they assume the artist is talking about like modern, overly animated, slapstick Ren and Stimpy SpongeBob. But no, this picture was drawn all the way back in 2013. No, this was in response to the SpongeBob I grew up with. I don't know, something about that's just so funny to me. Then we have Super Mini Puzzle Heroes Multiplayer. This game is cool because it's literally just Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. Here we have Dark Bloom from Winx Club and Master Splinter from TMNT. Then we have Nick Dance Off Clash On, where we have a pretty crazy character, Avatar Gur. You see, on the character select screen, if you just hold down left click on Gur instead of just tapping it, this white light will start to fill up Gur's icon. And once it fills all the way up, it'll let you play as Avatar Gur, a form of Gur that does more damage or some shit like that. Pretty neat. Then in Nicktoons Super Splash, we have Robot and Monster. You'll never guess what show they're from. Though, while they're only playable in this game, there is another Nick game that references them, being Dance Off Clash On. They're not there, but the background of the stage switches to their little hometown, and I think it's the only other reference to Robot and Monster in any of these Flash games. I don't know, I thought it was neat. Then we have Nick Soccer Stars, with the only playable appearance of TMNT's Karai, after which we get to another big one with Super Brawl 3, with a whole hodgepodge of weirdos, with Bob and Squeep from Monsters vs. Aliens, Tough Flips and Nudeman from Sanjay and Craig, Master Junji from Kung Fu Panda, Tano and Amon from The Legend of Korra, the Gold Ranger and Xandrid from Power Rangers, though these characters actually wound up getting removed in an update for whatever reason. And then finally, we have Ubisoft's very own Raving Rabbids. Man, I should really do a Rayman video sometime. That would be some heat. And then in Nick's Slime Cup, we have a bunch of live-action guys, with Goomer and Dice from Sam and Cat, and Taylor Hathaway, Louis Preston, Frankie Hathaway, and Miles Preston from the Haunted Hathaways. Well, kinda. Instead of making a 2D asset for them in this game, like the other Nick sitcom TV stars, funnily enough, they just slapped live-action photos of them on this little TV guy for this one minigame. It's honestly pretty funny. Fucking Metaton looking ass. And then we have quite possibly the stupidest game I've ever had to include for one of these videos. Nick's Not-So-Ultimate Boss Battles. An April Fool's single-player fighting game where you literally just press the right arrow key on your keyboard and instantly beat your opponent. We have the playable characters of The Log from Ren and Stimpy, Timmy's Dad, Ice Cream Kitty, Fugitoid, The Purple Ranger, Hector Man, Bolin, Suki, and the Miraculous Ladybug. Honestly, really shocked to see her and nothing else. I swear I heard that show was bigger. And then going from the stupidest game I've ever had to include to the stupidest character I've ever had to include. In Nick, the Amazing Chase, a game where you see how fast you can beat a randomized maze, though honestly just doing this is a lot more fun. Later in the game's life cycle, they decided to update the game to coincide with a new SpongeBob TV special where he gets lost in the woods or some shit, and added a whole new level where instead of playing as SpongeBob, you play as SpongeBob with a hat. Yeah. Then in Nickelodeon All-Stars Tennis, we have the Sanjay and Craig characters of Hector and Megan, as well as these weird generic player characters of the Junior Pro Boy and the Junior Pro Girl. Super Brawl 4 brings us more SpongeBob madness with Incredibubble and Mr. Super Awesomeness, the Sponge and Stars superhero personas from Sponge Out of Water, as well as Banana from the show Pig Goat Banana Cricket. That has to be the dumbest name I've ever heard. In Nick Racing Stars, we have Tiger Claw, who funnily enough is the final boss in Nick Super Brawl 4, but is, to my knowledge, not unlockable in that game, along with the Power Rangers villain, Snide. In Nickelodeon Surf's Up, we have Krang. In Nick Capture the Slime, we have two little fuzzy guys, Dr. Colosso from the Thundermans, as well as Simon from Alvin and the Chipmunks. Then we get to Nickelodeon Winter Spin and Win, featuring the quadruplets Nicky, Ricky, Dicky, and Dawn. Actually did learn something really funny while doing research for this video. Apparently, in Nicky, Ricky, Dicky, and Dawn, you know, this show all about these quadruplets and the fact that they're all related. Apparently, the kid who played Dicky decided they wanted to leave the show right in the middle of its 4th season, so the show actually had to write him out. Again, one of the title characters in the show all about siblings. They had to write him out. So in the show, what they did, they had his parents just send him to a boarding school in Australia and just replaced him with some Australian guy named Britt. And the show gets canceled like 2 episodes later. Now that's just quality television right there. In Super Brawl Universe, where the Super Brawl series jumped to mobile, we have some more probably should be costumes but are listed as characters with the Quickster, the Elastic Waistband, Karate Island Sandy, Avatar State Aang, Avatar State Korra, Ace Savvy, One-Eyed Jack, and Cleft, the boy Chin Wonder. Then we have the biggest collection of one-timers on this list, with the Great Nickelodeon Slime Rally. And a ton of them here actually being live action. From the Loud House, we have Lana and Lily Loud. From Henry Danger, we have Jasper, Piper, and Schwaz. From the Game Shakers, we have Double G, Triple G, and Hudson. The Thundermans, Billy, Hank, Barb, Chloe, and Dark Mayhem. And from a show I literally had no inkling of an idea even existed before making this, Night Squad. We have Ark, Sage, Prudence, Warwick, Buttercup, Sir Gareth, and Clara. And for our final flash game of the one-timers, well, technically it's HTML5, but fucking whatever. We have from Danger Force, Miles, Choppa, Mika, and Bose, Annie, George, and Pony from It's Pony, Ronnie Ann, Sid Chang, and Bobby from the Casagrandes. And finally, Pearl from SpongeBob. Now back to the console games to wrap us up. In Nick All-Star Brawl 1, our only one-timer is Hugh Neutron. In Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3, we have Camper, SpongeBob, and Patrick from Camp Coral, alongside Squidina from the Patrick Star Show, as well as Eastman and Laird, Raph, and Odie from Garfield. And to finish off the one-timers, in Nick All-Star Brawl 2, we have Azula, Uncle Iroh, Ember, Grandma Gertie, and Rocksteady. Alright, finally on to the two-timers. Our first Nickelodeon character to make only 2 appearances is Otto Rocket, only managing to appear in Freeze Frame Frenzy and Nick Party Blast, who is actually followed by his sister, Reggie Rocket, who while also appearing in Party Blast, makes her extra appearance in Nicktoons Basketball. Also appearing in that game, as well as Nicktoons Volleyball, is Cosmo from the Fairly Odd Parents. Also from the Fairly Odd Parents is Denzel Crocker in Winners Cup Racing and Super Brawl 3. Honestly, I would have loved to see this guy in Nick All-Star Brawl. Speaking of bad guys, moving on to the villains from the 2 ports of Globs of Doom, and Dib, with Technus, Beautiful Gorgeous, Tlalak, and Dib Membrane. Following that, we have 2 sitcom stars from Victorious, Tori and Kat. And in the 2 versions of Nicktoons MLB on this list, we have Larry the Lobster, the Flying Dutchman, Ultra Lord, Gaz Membrane, Mr. Nesmith, and Shaven Yak. Yeah, I'm so happy that Shaven Yak gets the cleanest PNG on Earth. Well, I've got to use the fucking scuffed as shit GameCube model for Ultra Lord. That's just fantastic. Though, up next, we have a character exclusive to the 3DS versions of Nick MLB, along with Puzzle Heroes. It's Hero Mighty Paw from Monkey Quest. Unrelated side note, did anyone play this as a kid? I was much more of a Fusion Fall, Toontown type of kid myself, so I never checked out Monkey Quest, and I feel like it never comes up in conversation when people talk about nostalgic children's MMOs. So any Monkey Quest fans in the comments, sound off, I guess. Back to live action with Bella from Bella and the Bulldogs in Football Stars and the Hat SpongeBob game. Then we have Nora Thunderman in Slime Cup as well as Great Slime Rally. Then Gary the Snail in Super Brawl 3, Just Got Real, and Block Party 2. Theodore in Not So Ultimate Boss Battles and Capture the Slime. Bunsen from that one really shitty Butch cartoon in Super Brawl World and Surf's Up. Luann Loud also in Super Brawl World and the Great Nickelodeon Slime Rally. Fittingly, in 2 sports games, we have Casey Jones with Lola Loud in Slime Rally and Racing Stars, Charlotte from Henry Danger also in Slime Rally and Capture the Slime. Then we have Lori Loud in Paper Battle Multiplayer as well as Slime Rally, and Mrs. Puff in Bodo Cross 3 as well as Nickelodeon Lanes. And then we get to, I'll let you know, I was flabbergasted when I first saw this, but no, this is a real character, Purple Reptar. He shows up for less than a second in the original Rugrats cartoon, then was subsequently doomed to appearing for the rest of time as an alternate palette swap or secret character in video games where Reptar is playable, as well as limited edition chaser variants for fucking Funko Pops. What a legacy. Joining him though in Super Brawl Universe is Luna Loud, also appearing in Nickelodeon Slime Rally. And also in Super Brawl Universe is Heifer Wolf from Rocco's Modern Life. Then in Slime Rally and Lanes, we have Lenny Loud. In Slime Carts 2 and 3 is Chucky Finster. In Nick All-Star Brawl 1 and Slime Cart 3, we have Oblina, our last real monster. In Nick Soccer Stars 2, as well as Paper Battle, we have Brittany, the leading member of the Chipettes. In only the Nick All-Star Brawls, we have the playable appearance of Nigel Thornberry. And for our last two-timer in Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis and Nick Kart Racers 3, we have the Rugrats, Susie Carmichael. And for the first of our three-timers, we have Norbert and Daggett Beaver, making the same appearances in the two original Nicktoons Racings and Nazby 2. Then we have Danny Phantom's famous Hot Topic Will They Won't They, Sam Manson, making most of her appearances in the platforming games. And following this is a whole lineup of Nickelodeon girl side characters. We have Wanda in volleyball, basketball, and Slime Cup, Cindy Vortex trading out Slime Cup for Slime Speedway, and Avatar's Katara appearing in Nick Slime Ball and the MLB games. Then immediately going from side girls to some leading ladies, where we have Carly Shay from iCarly in Nick Racers Revolution, Nick Racers, and Block Party. Then we have Mighty B's Bessie Higginbottom, only appearing in 3 of the Super Brawl games. Gotta earn that self-defense badge somehow, I guess. Already throwing hands at 9 years old. Then we have Sam Puckett from iCarly as well. Do you think she's glad she's appeared in this many games? Do you think she's glad? Okay, yeah, that one kind of sucked. My bad. Moving on, we have our first DreamWorks character of the 3-timers, the Kung Fu Panda himself, in 2 of the Super Brawls, as well as Puzzle Heroes. Following that, back to the female side characters, we have Asami from The Legend of Korra. Harvey Beaks is next up, somehow the least popular playable character in his own show. Sucks to suck, I guess. And speaking of sucking, we have Chloe from the Fairly Odd Parents. More specifically, the seasons where the writers officially ran out of ideas. You love to see it, honestly. I hope every show I've ever loved exists long enough to just ran right into the ground. Then we have Ollie Timbers from Welcome to the Waynes, which I guess was supposed to be Nickelodeon's stab at Gravity Falls or something. I don't know, never heard of it. Then we have the Sky Whale from Nickelodeon's Game Shakers, which is about a group of young mobile game creators who get big after basically just making one of those old school Newgrounds cannon launcher games with this little goober as the mascot. So this is a fictional video game character from a sitcom being made into an actual video game character. Video gameception, I guess. Then in All Stars Tennis and Super Brawl 2, as well as GSR, we have Eugene Krabs. Then in GSR, Lanes, and Capture the Slime, we have Lisa Loud. Only in the console games, we have Gerald Johansson from Hey Arnold! And to cap us off, Hoo Boy! Only in the modern racing titles do we have Nickelodeon's very own JoJo Siwa. Insert some sort of witty retort about her failed rebrand here. Honestly, just watching it might be enough. Ugh, yikes. And the 4-timers bring us another decent chunk of characters. Starting with another oldie, Eliza Thornberry. In the 2 Racings and Party Blast, she managed to hop her way onto the retro revival in Nick's mobile tennis game. Then we have El Tigre, or as I like to call him, the Tiger. Playable in most of the platformers, and even getting a special spot alongside Danny Phantom and SpongeBob in Nicktoons Android Invasion for the Leapfrog Didgy. Didj? What the fuck is this thing called? Then we have another line of DreamWorks guys, all from the Penguins of Madagascar, with Private, Dr. Blowhole, and even Skipper, though we've still got 2 other Penguins characters ahead. Then over at Avatar, we have the characters Toph and Prince Zuko, both in both Nick MLB's and Kart Racers 3, but both of them also trading All-Star Brawl sequels. Okay, but seriously, how the fuck is Toph in like half of these? Okay, maybe she can use her seismic sense like through the car and into the road, but baseball? She's blind! And speaking of scuffed Nicktoons MLB characters, making up the same exact appearances as Toph, we have Ren and Stimpy's Powdered Toast Man. No, seriously, look at him. He's built like a fucking Germa Rumble character. Between that and fucking Giraffe Neck Kitty Catswell and FNAF animatronic Dudley Puppy. Jesus, this game is ass ugly. Following that, we have Bloom from Winx Club. Honestly, kinda rings a bell, but never seen an episode in my entire life, but cool that she appears a decent amount. Then we have Abrasive SpongeBob, opposing our good SpongeBob as an evil, sinister, malcontent SpongeBob. Funnily enough, showing up mostly in the Super Brawls. If SpongeBob in those games was Ryu, I guess that makes Abrasive SpongeBob evil Ryu. Funny how that works out. Speaking of bad dudes, TMNT's The Shredder, also making it into Super Brawl, but also games like Nazby 1 and 2 of the kart racers. Then Max Thunderman in Paper Battle, Slime Cup, Capture the Slime, and Great Slime Rally. Just sliming everywhere. This kid's crazy about slime. If slime is involved, he's there. And then from Harvey Beaks, we have Foo in 3 sports games and a party title. With Pig from Pig, Goat, Banana, Cricket only seeing a slight deviation from Foo's playable appearances. And to finish us off, we have Garfield, that fat and lazy cat, in both Nazby's Kart Racer 3 and Extreme Tennis. Luckily for us, the 5-timers are pretty short and sweet, kicking things off with King Julian, getting all his appearances in the Super Brawl series, as he was pretty important to those games, acting as the organizer of the Super Brawl, and in some of the games even acting as its final boss, before just becoming one of the cast until Super Brawl 3. Funny how a third-party character wound up being so integral to the identity of one of Nickelodeon's most prominent crossover games, with him being followed by Kitty Catswell, though only in Super Brawl 2, she would make up for it in the MLBs as well as 2 other games. Then we have our final Harvey Beaks character, Fee, mainly in the Sports Stars series, but also in Not So Ultimate Boss Battles and Nick Block Party 2. And ending off the 5-timers, we have Lucy Loud, the first of our more popular Loud siblings, notable for her appearances in the All-Star Brawl series, even getting in over Lincoln in Nazby 2. Also, she races, I guess. 6-timers ain't too bad either. Kicking it off, we have Sheen, who only got 1 appearance back when he was just Jimmy Neutron's friend, but after getting his own show, managed to snag 5 more appearances. It's a shame Carl isn't playable in anything here. Though I should probably bring up this one little tidbit about Sheen that everyone else brings up when talking about him in the Super Brawl series, that being his removal from Super Fall Brawl. Now, unlike the Power Rangers characters of Super Brawl 3, his removal isn't quite a mystery, as he was specifically removed from the game for being completely and totally broken. Bro's out here making Pet Shop look like Street Fighter 312, man, it's crazy. And then, for our most popular Penguins character, we have Rico. Probably surprising if you're not familiar with the Super Brawl series, which is where we find most of his appearances. And then we have the main protag of Butch Hartman's last good cartoon before his brain melted into a weird goo.
And being a guy who's in his 50s who's done, or a boss, a guy who's done shows, a guy who's stayed up late at night working really hard.
To answer questions from people who never got anything and when they want to criticize, it makes me laugh.
Dudley Puppy from Tough Puppy, and a real scattering of playable appearances. Super Brawl, MLB, Block Party, just kinda all over the place. Up next, we have Ren from Ren and Stimpy, an older character who never really made it into the really early titles, but has been getting plenty of use in the newer 90s revival type games. Also Nick MLB for some reason. John K just really needed his cans without labels money that day or something, I don't know. And to finish us off, we have Badooz from The Breadwinners, just in a couple of the Stars and Super Brawl titles. 7-timers gets a little lengthy again, starting with a pretty old character, Cat Dog, with another case of an older character only playable in the Nicktoons racing games before being brought back for the modern titles. Happy to see it though, Cat Dog is cool. Then we have every Hot Topic 2000s favorite, Grr from Invader Sim, who seems to be taking consistent 5-year breaks in between handfuls of games, from Attack of the Toy Bots to a handful of Flash titles, to now in some racing and a fighting title. One who was consistent in his playable appearances though seems to be Sway Sway, who much like Badooz, was only featured in games from 2014 to 2015. 2015. A character with a little more longevity, however, is Captain Man, though it seems similar to the Breadwinners by being exclusively a Flash character. Just like Goat from Pig Goat Banana Cricket, our final character from the series, meaning Cricket doesn't appear playable in any crossover games. I wonder what the deal with that was. Though a classic character who never appeared playable in any classic game is Reptar. First playable in Brawl Universe, followed by a good chunk of Modern Kart Racers and the All-Star Brawl series. And the last character we have here is Clyde McBride, who makes the usual appearances you'd expect at this point for a Loud House character, though he does seem to have a bit more longevity, surviving into the console releases. And now with the 8-timers, with a decent chunk to plow through, with most of them to start out with being the older characters making a comeback, like I mentioned with Cat Dog. With the first of those characters being Angelica Pickles, who seems to be right at home in this new retro revival wave, mostly sticking to the racing and sports titles. Oh, by the way, specifically in Nicktoons Volleyball for Angelica and a couple of Tommy's playable appearances later, they actually decide to use their designs from the Rugrats spin-off All Grown Up. I don't think they count as separate characters, but it's fun to know. Then we have Stimpy Cat, same case as Ren really, though actually making some playable appearances before Nicktoons MLB. Then we have Helga Pataki, the love interest slash restraining order waiting to happen from Arnold! Arnold! You know what you did! You know what you did! Who notably stood in for Arnold in NASB 1 to fight for him, considering he's a pacifist and all that. Then we have a character who I swore would be more popular, SpongeBob's very own Squidward. With his earliest playable crossover being Nicktoons Basketball, he'd have to wait exactly 10 years before reappearing playable again, where he gets a decent amount of playable placings. And to end the retro craze, we have Rocco, who actually first appeared in Attack of the Toybots instead of any of the really old titles. Then, moving on from the 90s, we have our only 2 mid to late 2000s reps in the 8-timers, starting with Otis the Cow from Back at the Barnyard. Not gonna lie, this show was my favorite as a kid, so I'm glad to see Otis got picked up for a lot of games while he was around. Pretty neat. With our second character of this era being Chum Chum from Fanboy and Chum Chum. Man, that show was maybe kind of stupid as hell, but I actually really loved it as a kid. Anyway, same case as Otis, though he made it much farther into 2014 than he ever did. On to the more modern characters, however, starting with Lynn Loud. Of course, with her being the sports-interested sister, naturally that made her a perfect candidate for the sports Flash games. And to top us off, we have Kenzie, one of the protagonists of the Game Shakers. It's weird how many characters from that show made it into these games. Was Game Shakers that successful? I'm gonna be honest, I literally only know it as that one Nickelodeon show with fucking Pro Jared in it. And then we have our only 4 9-timers, starting with our most popular playable villain, Sheldon J. Plankton. Playable in a good amount of games, most of them being fighting games. Though there is one distinction I think I should clarify. In Nick All-Star Brawl 2, while Plankton is piloting this robot, the game decides to give the playable credit to Mecha Plankton, the robot he's piloting rather than himself, which I think is stupid. Because in previous fighting games, like the Super Brawl titles, Plankton pulls a similar stunt with pilotable robots and mind-controlled fish guys, but there, he's just classified as Plankton. So I think I'm just gonna lump this under a Plankton appearance for consistency's sake. Hope that's cool. Speaking of robots though, we have Jenny Wakeman, the teenage robot, whose roster of games seems pretty balanced, but more so appears in Nick's fighting games, and is notable for being also playable in Attack of the Toybots. Following that, we have Alvin from Alvin and the Chipmunks. I mean, I don't really know what to say for this one. It's Alvin. He was in video games. I mean, I guess I could talk about the new look he has in his newer cartoons. I mean, I think it's okay.
But just horrid when they're thugs.
And for our final 9-timer, damn, the Pro Geared show was way more popular than I thought. It's Babe Carano from the Game Shakers. Being an absolute Flash game demon over here. Starting off in Block Party and appearing semi-regularly into 2019. Then we officially enter the tens range, with a surprisingly large amount of playable characters with only 10 appearances. This is where we start getting to the really big guys. Starting us off, we have Arnold. You smug, football-headed fuck. The whole world wants to forget. You want everyone to forget. But I know what you did, and I will never let you leave. Mostly appearing in racing titles, though funnily enough, the Nick All-Star Brawl devs said he wasn't able to join those games because of his pacifism, but that didn't stop him from throwing hands in at least one Nick fighting game. Bro was just out for blood that day, I guess. Then we have our last Nickelodeon game character, and someone who is like sorta kinda part of the OG team. I don't know, he was always just sorta there. Tak from Tak and the Power of Juju, taking breaks from his own 3D platforming series to make appearances in the ones of this crossover series. Then we have the Pink Ranger from the Power Rangers, appearing playable mostly in the sports titles. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention it before, but in these games I do believe the Rangers featured are based off different Power Rangers from different Power Ranger shows, which I think makes them technically different characters. I wouldn't know, I've never watched Power Rangers, but just for this video, I've just decided to lump them together as the same character for simplicity's sake. You know, it's the Pink Ranger. But do let me know what you think. I'm thinking of maybe making a Power Rangers video someday, and I'd want to know if I should count the different iterations separately. Up next is another girl character with TMNT's April O'Neil, with a healthy mix of Flash titles and console releases, with the Flash games mainly featuring her in her 2012 look, and the console titles in her classic 90s attire. And for our last 10-timer, we have Phoebe Thunderman, just appearing playable in a pretty decent spread of games in Nick's Flash game boom era. I guess she was a popular pick. Moving on to 11 appearances, however, we have Fanboy from Fanboy and Chum Chum, who really just seemed to pop up here and there for the occasional sports or racing thing. But where he really got his mileage was in the Super Brawl series, where he makes most of his playable appearances. And sharing 11 appearances with Fanboy is our final Power Rangers character, the Red Ranger, sharing a pretty big overlap in playable appearances with the Pink Ranger, as you would expect, still focusing mainly on the sports titles. Though, weirdly enough, similar to the Power Rangers characters of Super Brawl 3, he actually may have been removed from a Flash game, this time being Nickelodeon Tag Attack. I don't know, he isn't playable on the version that's on Flashpoint, but here he is in the trailer for Nickelodeon Tag Attack, so I don't know if the version of Flashpoint's just outdated, or if he just got straight up removed. And at 12 appearances, someone who, similar to Fanboy, also shows up in a lot of fighting titles is Avatar's Korra. Funnily enough, featuring in the inverse of Fanboy's playable fighting game appearances. While he appeared in the original on to Super Brawl 2, she would appear mostly in Super Brawl 3 and onward. Then we have two 13-timers, starting with Nick's Cash Cow before SpongeBob, Tommy Pickles from the Rugrats, who appears to have a knack for racing games, which I guess makes sense because he's a toddler. He's not exactly built for any extreme sports. Though I guess that hasn't stopped him from being in at least one real fighting game. Damn, what is with all these bloodthirsty grade schoolers in these games? These kids hit hard. Our other 13-timer is Craig, the Talking Snake, Mike from Sanjay and Craig. Lots of Flash sports games for this reptile, usually accompanied by Sanjay, though he has gotten a few playable slots of his own without his best buddy. Now onto our two 15 timers, starting with Invader Zim, with an honestly just pretty balanced showing all around, a decent slice of every single category, as well as every single year from the early days to the mid-2000s to the late 2010s to now. But a character who absolutely thrived, and only thrived in a specific era, being the late 2010s, is Sanjay from Sanjay and Craig. You know, it's funny, I kinda hated this show as a kid, but now when I see it, it's kinda just like seeing an old friend. Like, hey man, what's up Sanjay? Anyway, yeah, tons of sports Flash games, and not too much for any other category, really. Then over at 17 appearances, we have the last airbender himself, Aang. Really weird he isn't in any of the platforming games at all, but his numerous fighting game appearances do make sense. And so do his racing game appearances, I think. I mean, he flies around on a sky bison. It's kind of like a car. And I should also probably add that Super Brawl 3 is the only game in the entire crossover series where you specifically play as adult Aang. I don't think anyone in the entire world would give a flying fuck about specifically playing as adult Aang, but if you are that person, then you're welcome. Also, what is wrong with you? And for our final character of the 10s at 19 appearances, we have Sandy Cheeks, a character who has seen sporadic but still plentiful appearances throughout the series since the beginning. Though it seems the category she debuted in proves to be her most popular role, as she's appeared in a ton of sports titles. And at the 20s range, our final and most popular live-action character, we have Henry Danger, who was pretty much playable in every Flash game you could find in the mid to late 2010s, with most of those being sports games. And sadly, we then have our least popular of the Unite squad, aside from Tak, I guess, and my current favorite Nicktoon, Jimmy Neutron. While he was a mainstay in the traditional platforming titles, except for Volcano Island for some reason, he's been used pretty sparsely in most other genres, especially the fighting games, where he was only playable in just 2. Speaking of least populars in squads of 4, we have our first Ninja Turtle. At 34 appearances, it's Donatello. Now, with the Turtles, it sort of kind of resembles the issue I had with the Power Rangers, where for some of their games, they decidedly take on the looks of distinct incarnations, and I wasn't sure if I should count those separately, so Turtle fans in the comments do let me know. But for the most part, the Flash games all use their 2012 counterparts, the console games all go for their classic 90s looks, and only in Super Brawl Universe do they have their Rise of the TMNT designs. Though funnily enough, right up next, we have our next Ninja Turtle, Leonardo, who while has one less racing game appearance compared to Donnie, he appeared in 2 more sports games than he did, where he just barely gets one over on his bro. But getting just one over on Leo is yet another Ninja Turtle, this time being Raphael, who literally almost has the exact same playable appearances as Nardo, only just missing each other by being in separate all-star brawls, and makes his one extra playable appearance by being exclusively playable in Nick Block Party 3. But sharing 26 playable appearances is the last of our 20s range, being Lincoln Loud, who's just kind of like Kid Danger if he was allowed to actually appear playable in the console games, surviving into the retro revival era looking pretty consistent, though he did get dropped for his spooky sister in Nazby 2. Then onto the 30s range, where we only have 3 characters. To start us off, we have our final Ninja Turtle, Michelangelo, who, like his brothers, is just in a decent amount of karting and fighting and miscellaneous titles, but is severely carried by being playable in just about every single sports Flash game Nickelodeon has to offer. Not only has Nick gotten a ton of mileage out of using the turtles now that they have the license, but Mikey specifically has just been getting a ton of the spotlight. And sharing the exact same number of playable appearances as Michelangelo, we have Danny Phantom. Phantom. And what is there to really say about Danny? He was one of the original 4, so he's playable in everything regarding the Nicktoons Unite series. His Flash game appearances were limited to the mid to late 2000s, so he was kinda dropped for a while aside from being in the MLB and early Super Brawl titles, but the modern console titles, he's definitely been making a comeback. Then at 36 playable appearances, for our final 30s Ranger, we have Timmy Turner from the Fairly Odd Parents, who's basically just like Danny if he was allowed to appear in games featuring the big flash boom of the late 2010s. Funnily enough, his most prevalent category of games he's appeared in are fighting games, which is funny considering his notable absences in the NASB series. He's also just weirdly absent from racing games. Kind of strange. And get ready for this one. Jumping all the way to 50 playable appearances, we have, who else? Patrick Star. He basically just acts as you would expect. He's SpongeBob's buddy, and whatever game SpongeBob needs a buddy from his franchise, he's there. And if he doesn't, a better luck next time, man. So in things like the sports, fighting, and racing games, he's a pretty surefire bet. But the more single character per franchise focused stuff like the platformers and party titles, unfortunately, he's out of luck. Sitting upon a pretty lonely middle area, higher than pretty much everyone else on the list, but still so far from the top. And then we move on to our final character, making our biggest jump in playable appearances history, going from 50 to a staggering 83 playable titles. To the surprise of no one, it's SpongeBob SquarePants, who, as I said before, is only playable in 83 out of the total 87 Nickelodeon crossover games. That's right, Nickelodeon's worldwide sensation, their cash cow, their yellow titan of animation is missing 4 games. Which begs the question, why and how? Well, eagle-eyed viewers might have seen the first one, being Dance Off Clash On, a Nicktoons crossover that sure has a ton of Nicktoons in the background of this big crazy dance party, but only features the playable tunes of Aang, Gur, Timmy, and Avatar Gur. Same case with Nick Slime Cup, which does feature a ton of playable SpongeBob characters. Sandy, Patrick, Plankton, and even Squidward are here. But I guess he was just busy that day. Judging from him on this title screen, maybe he just decided to be the referee? It's just kind of weird. And then we have Nick Action Packed, a game that really sucks, but is also a game which has you exclusively playing as the sidekicks, with the playable characters here being Patrick, Private, Chum Chum, and Sam. But truly the strangest of them all has to be Nicktoons Super Splash, which, get this, is a 3-way crossover game between the cartoon franchises of Fanboy and Chum Chum, Tough Puppy, and Robot and Monster. What were they cooking? And yeah, that's it. That's the video. Thanks for watching. As you could probably tell, I kinda lied about picking a shorter subject after my big Pokemon video, but honestly, I'm really proud with what I made here, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Of course, as always, big thanks to my patrons, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.